Before we start, do me a favor and hit that like button. We're aiming for 50,000 likes on this video, and your support by subscribing to this channel is the best way to make that happen. Now let's get right into the heart of the matter. The scene opens on the stark farmlands of Plainfield, Wisconsin. The winter air is thin and cold, mirroring the man who moves through it. Ed Gein, a solitary figure cloaked in shadow and ill-fitting clothes, stalks his obsession, a local woman named Adeline. In his mind, she is the supposed love of his life, a strange, flickering beacon in his desolate existence. Inside a modest two-story dwelling, Adeline's house, she and her friend Madison are engaged in a casual, unguarded moment. They stand before a chipped antique mirror, playfully scrutinizing their figures in their underwear, laughing softly at the trivialities of their appearances. Ed, hidden beneath the floorboards, an unwelcome shadow in the structure of the house, fixates on the sight. A primal, frantic excitement surges through his wiry frame. He begins to rock back and forth in the claustrophobic space, a rhythmic, uncontrollable motion that causes the aging floorboards to creak in protest. The sharp, unsettling sound cuts through the girls' light-hearted chatter. They pause, heads cocked, a moment of creeping apprehension settling over them. They move toward the sound, suspicion dawning. Ed, jolted by the near discovery, snaps out of his trance. The creep manages a desperate, silent scramble, bolting out of Adeline's house and retreating into the concealing darkness of the rural night just moments before the girls could have spotted him, a phantom of their unsettling intuition. After arriving back at the desolate Gein farmhouse, a monument to decay and isolation, Ed retreats to his room. The familiar, suffocating atmosphere of the house, dominated entirely by his mother's iron will, is his only comfort and torment. He immediately engages in his strange, explicit activities, seeking relief in a ritual of transgression. He wears a pair of his mother's knickers, the delicate, forbidden fabric a grotesque parody of affection and control. However, the psychological weight of his recent near-miss and his own twisted desires prove too much. He is unable to get the job done. His mind is a whirlwind of fear and frustration. It is at this vulnerable, compromising moment that Augusta Gein, Ed's mother, a woman whose presence is a dense, suffocating fog, violently barges into the room. Her eyes, hard and unforgiving, rake over her son, finding him in his state of pathetic, exposed confusion. The ensuing confrontation is brutal and immediate. Augusta, fueled by a terrifying religious fury, drags him into the living room. Ed is still stark naked, his humiliation total and absolute. Augusta begins her relentless chastisement, her voice a sharp, condemning instrument, railing against his unholy activities and the stain of sin he has brought into her home. He is silent, submissive, absorbing the verbal blows like a lifelong ritual. Once her initial torrent of condemnation subsides, the topic swiftly shifts to Ed's burgeoning, tentative love for Adeline. The mention of any outside female presence immediately reignites Augusta's tyrannical wrath. With chilling finality, Augusta warns him to never be with that woman, or indeed, any other woman for that matter. Her demand is absolute, a pure life, a life devoted solely to her and God, free from the contaminating influence of Eve's sinful daughters. Ed hangs his head, accepting the sentence. Yet, despite his mother's psychic grip, Ed possesses a sliver of defiance. A few moments later, we find him engaging in a profoundly normal activity that contrasts sharply with the horror of his home life. He is meeting with Adeline at the local diner. They sit in a booth, sipping on thick milkshakes, attempting a semblance of casual conversation. Their small talk, however, reveals their shared, unsettling preoccupation. They discuss the atrocities being done to the Jews at concentration camps by the Nazis. The conversation is morbidly fascinating to Ed, but the true source of his dark inspiration is revealed when they discuss the work of Ilse Ko, also known as the Witch of Buchenwald. Their source is a pulp magazine written in her honor, detailing her sadistic cruelty. Ed had always been fascinated by the pictures of dead bodies that found their way into various publications, but Keogh's perverse artistry, or transformation of human remains into household objects, supposedly inspires him on an artistic level. Her example is a seed planted in his twisted mind, a roadmap for his own eventual descent. The next day, Ed is busy chopping some firewood at the barn, the monotonous labor providing a momentary shield from his thoughts. The thud of the axe is the only sound until his older brother, Henry, appears, breaking the solitude. Henry is a physical and psychological contrast to Ed, a man trying to sever the cord. He announces that he is going to marry a girl named Jenny. The news sends a jolt of moral panic through Ed. He immediately invokes his mother's decree. Ed sputters that Henry can't do that because Jenny has divorced twice, an unforgivable sin in Augusta's fundamentalist worldview, and their mother will not allow a union with such a woman. Henry, however, is at his breaking point. He replies that he is done listening to their mother and expresses a desperate wish that one day Ed will also escape the cage that Augusta has been keeping them in for their entire lives. As Henry tries to explain that their mother is sick in the head, offering a rational assessment of the toxic domestic environment, Ed's face tightens. This is the forbidden topic. He gets angry and doesn't want to have a discussion on that topic. His loyalty is primal, absolute. Henry recognizes the futility of argument and gives Ed a final piece of advice about leaving their mother in the rearview mirror as soon as possible. With a sigh of defeat, he proceeds to leave. It is the finality of this abandonment, the unspoken challenge to Augusta's dominance, that triggers Ed's ultimate break. A sudden murderous rage consumes him. That's when Ed strikes his brother from behind with a piece of chopped wood. The blow is delivered with a savage, unthinking force. Henry dies on the spot, an act of fratricide committed in defense of a destructive maternal love. Ed stares at the lifeless body, the silence of the barn now profound and chilling. While transporting the firewood home, Ed's mind, already fractured, begins its perverse process of self-justification. To ease the unbearable reality of what he has done, he fabricates a scene, a soothing, desperate imagination. He pictures Henry getting up, rubbing the injury on his head, and shrugging off the injury as though it were a minor inconvenience. He imagines Henry taking back all the ill stuff he had said about their mother, promising that he'll make amends with her, and then peacefully shutting the doors of the barn. This false conversation warms Ed's heart, allowing him to bypass the truth of his crime. He rationalizes the murder as a momentary accidental lapse, and he resumes his journey to his house, the horror temporarily shelved. Later, while having dinner, a ritual of silent obedience, Ed cannot entirely suppress the anxiety. He cautiously checks with Augusta if Henry has fulfilled the promise that he had imagined Henry making. Augusta, with her characteristic coldness, says that she hasn't seen Henry for a whole week. With a callous disregard for her missing son, she disowns Henry as her son, stating she is certain that he has run away with Jenny. She then launches into an absolute rant about how her family life has been a complete failure. Her bitterness knows no bounds. She recounts how she was defiled twice by her husband George Gein, Ed's father, painting a lurid picture of an unhappy marriage, and how she ended up with two good-for-nothing sons even though she wanted daughters. The most cutting of her verbal assaults comes when she keeps saying the term, "Only a mother could love you," a phrase which, in her mouth, is just another way of saying that he is unworthy of love. The implication is clear. She is tolerating his presence merely because she is sort of obligated to be affectionate towards him as a mother. In the midst of her self-pity and condemnation, a sliver of terrifying realization pierces Ed's delusion. He discovers that he had imagined Henry talking to him about reuniting with Augusta, whereas in reality, his brother is still very dead. The lie he created to save himself disintegrates. The truth, cold and heavy, demands action. He returns to the barn and begins the final macabre cleanup. He drags Henry's body into the bushes, stacking a massive quantity of branches, broken pieces of wood, and shrubs on him, constructing an impromptu desperate pyre. He then sets them on fire with a blowtorch, attempting to erase the evidence of his crime from the physical world. After the necessary official visit to the coroner, where the death is presumably ruled an accident, a farm fire gone awry, Ed returns to the farmhouse. He approaches his mother, a strange mixture of servility and calculation in his demeanor. Ed tells his mother that Henry wasn't a good son. He knows that of the two of them, Augusta loved Henry more, a fact that has always been a subtle, constant poison in his life. But now with Henry gone, Ed says that he'll fill his shoes as efficiently as possible, promising to become the perfect, solitary heir to her control. While he is saying all this, he notices a troubling lack of response. He notices that his mother isn't responding and is sobbing away. He moves closer, his heart a sudden fist of dread, and he realizes that Augusta has suffered a stroke. This is not just an illness. It is the physical manifestation of her imminent departure, a terrifying prospect for the man whose entire identity is wrapped up in her existence. He rushes her to the doctors, where the diagnosis is grim and final. He'll need to always take care of his mother. He is trapped, not by command, but by her weakness. The burden of care begins immediately. While giving her a bath, performing the most intimate of duties for the woman he fears and worships, Ed's mind drifts. The sight of the pale, inert body beneath the water triggers a horrific imagination. He seemingly imagines Ilsa Ko cleaning the dead body of a Jewish prisoner. This is the trigger for a full-fledged zone of interest sequence, a disturbing, prolonged fantasy of Nazi decadence and cruelty. There is a party going on in Ko's house, a scene of detached, oblivious gaiety, where the servers are Jewish prisoners forced to attend to their captors. We see a young kid named Henriette who is interested in shaving the heads of Jewish girls, engaging in casual torture. The scene escalates to a grotesque fever pitch when Ko rides a donkey inside her house and chases after a Jewish woman, an image of utter, contemptuous power. This Nazi imagination segment comes to an abrupt and jarring end when Ed hears the real world intrude, his mother calling for him. The reason is financial and mundane, yet absolutely non-negotiable for Augusta. She wants to go to the Smith's farm and collect the $10 rent that they owe the Geins. Ed tries to argue, pleading with her that Augusta shouldn't be physically exerting herself because she isn't all that healthy. He tells her to rest while he goes and collects the money. But Augusta's will is absolute. She feels that Augusta has no option but to take matters into her own hands, her distrust of Ed's capabilities overriding her own frailty. Ed realizes that there's no point arguing with his mother. Her decision is made. And so both head over to the Smiths to confront them. The confrontation plays out exactly as Ed feared. Augusta gets really worked up while asking for her money, her voice rising in strident indignation. The stress of the argument is too much for her weakened body, and she suffers yet another stroke. This time, it is fatal. She is unable to survive this one, and she dies. The world collapses into a void for Ed. After performing her final rites, a somber, hollow ceremony, Ed walks all the way from the cemetery to his house. The journey is a physical manifestation of his profound, absolute aloneness. He then proceeds to sit in the rocking chair where Augusta used to sit all the time. It is a desperate attempt to inhabit her presence, to steal her authority. But the chair is not his. That's when he hears Augusta's voice screaming at him to get off that chair, a clear, shrill hallucination that sent a shock of fear through him. He promptly jumps away from it. He tries again. When he sits down on it a second time, he doesn't hear anything. The silence is a crushing acknowledgement of her true absence. The next day, the routine of his life reasserts itself. After doing his daily chores, Ed goes back to his old ways of wearing his mother's knickers and doing seedy stuff, an attempt to self-soothe with the only perverse comfort he knows. But Augusta's presence, though dead, is not gone. That's when he hears his mother's voice again, this time a voice of moral condemnation, telling him to stop doing such activities. The voice, now more directive, offers an impossible solution. Augusta says that if he wants her to come back so desperately, he can just resurrect her. The seed is planted. Driven by this grotesque, supernatural instruction, he rushes to Plainfield Cemetery and begins digging up her body. But fate, or perhaps Providence, intervenes. When he is unable to get to Augusta's corpse because of the thick, frozen earth, he turns his attention to the grave next to hers. He takes out the body of the woman lying next to his mother's grave, an unknown female, a substitute vessel for his devotion, and brings her body home. He treats the corpse with a bizarre reverence. He puts her on the chair that his mother used to sit in and then disrobes her, preparing his ghastly mother figure replacement. We now turn to Adeline, who was perhaps the only girl who talked to Ed Gein with genuine interest. She felt that he related to her weirdness, and that he never judged her for her rather peculiar interests, a shared darkness of fascination. But poor Adeline had no clue who the real Ed Gein was and what he could do. Before Augusta's death, at times there were conversations about Adeline in the Gein household. Augusta, always vigilant, strictly told him to not go near that Jezebel. She told Gein to stay away from women as that was what he was supposed to do to prove that he was a devout Christian. But Ed, for all his terror of his mother, just couldn't resist his impulses. He wanted to talk to Adeline, bring her home, and introduce her to his mother, a desperate attempt to normalize his life through his mother's approval. Now, with Augusta physically gone, Ed is emboldened. After the grim business of exhuming corpses and using the skin of the deceased to create a human suit which he treated as his mother, a monstrous act of transformation, Ed decided to take charge of his own life. He resolved to go against his mother's wishes and express his feelings to Adeline. Ed was with Adeline when she told him about another of her morbid fascinations. She shared how she was fascinated by the profession of one Mr. Ouija. She explained to Ed that that man was a crime photographer who was called by the law enforcement authorities to take pictures of crime scenes. She told Ed, her eyes shining with dark excitement, that at times Mr. Ouija took pictures of victims who had died just hours before whose bodies were still warm. She concluded with a chilling intimacy. She said that there was something intimate about being around the people who had just passed away. This perverse, shared interest drew Ed in further. Ed took the plunge and brought her home. She was a bit surprised to see how messed up his place was, the house itself radiating a chilling, tangible neglect. Ed, however, was focused on the ultimate introduction. Ed took her upstairs to meet his mother. Adeline was likely a bit surprised by the kind of interest he was showing in her and how sure he had become of her in such a short span of time. She had no clue that Augusta Gein had passed away a few days back. Once Adeline went upstairs, the scene was set for horror. She saw somebody sitting in an armchair facing the other side. She politely greeted Ed's mother, a gesture of respect, but soon realized that something was terribly wrong. Ed had already made a strange confession. He had already told her how, just like the Witch of Buchenwald, he too had made a bowl out of a human skull. She had thought that he was joking, but once she reached his house, she realized that he was up to something. There, the smell, the inert figure, it all screamed a terrible truth. Terror took hold. Adeline ran away from there. She wanted nothing more to do with him. Ed, however, could not process this rejection through the lens of reality. Ed felt that Adeline parted ways with him because his mother didn't respond to her properly. His mental condition didn't let him see reality. He felt that for the first time in his life, he had the chance of going steady with a girl, but his mother just couldn't see him happy. The whole desperate experience pushed him over the edge, leaving him desperate to release his bottled-up rage. With a gun in hand, he initially thought he might satisfy his bloodlust by shooting a few squirrels, but this paltry violence didn't cut it. The urge was too deep, too human. He then went to a local bar where he came across Mary, the bartender, who was the wife of the owner. Ed fixated on her. He noticed how Mary looked exactly like his mother, a terrible echo in the smoky room. The latter was a bit weirded out by his comment. Ed, trying to cover the slip, told her that he didn't mean to disrespect her and got up and went to the washroom. In the confines of the washroom, Ed's troubled mind transported him to one of the Nazi gatherings where he saw Ilse Koh and her husband Carl sitting right in front of him. This twisted vision fueled something inside him, hardening his resolve. That's when he decided what he wanted to do. He came out of the washroom, the decision final. He aimed his gun at Mary, his face devoid of feeling. He told her that she was not worthy of being compared to his mother, adding an ultimate layer of justification to his crime, and then shot her point blank. He quickly took Mary's body and left the scene. The next day, the police arrived at the scene. The husband of the deceased told them that he had seen Ed entering the bar just moments before he left for work, making Ed an immediate person of interest. The narrative shifts abruptly, moving from the crime to the legacy. We are introduced to Alfred Hitchcock, his wife, and Robert Bloch, who had written a novel named Psycho about Ed Gein. Hitchcock, a cinematic visionary, seemed rather fascinated by the character of Ed Gein, and he had decided to make a film on him. Hitchcock's goal was profound. He aimed to portray who we truly are as a species, rather than what we aspire to be. He felt that Ed Gein's story marked a tectonic shift in the perceptions of people. He believed that by making a film on Ed Gein, he would change the very definition of a monster for American society. Hitchcock had a specific vision for his protagonist. He had chosen Anthony Perkins to play the protagonist in his film, and there was a very strong reason why he hadn't gone for a popular actor instead. Hitchcock was aware of Perkins's homosexuality, and he felt that that gave him a better understanding of who Ed Gein was as a person. Hitchcock didn't mean to offend Perkins in any manner, but he did feel that Perkins would understand the duality that existed with Gein because he was also experiencing something similar. Though Perkins's homosexuality was an open secret, he still couldn't talk about it openly because it was a taboo. Perkins was an actor committed to his craft. He wanted to deep dive into the mind of the character he was playing. He was very excited for the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity he got. To grasp the twisted psyche of Norman Bates, he cross-dressed just to understand the psyche of Ed Gein, a method that alarmed his inner circle. His partner felt that he was stretching the limits, as that was not how one approached a character. Hitchcock, ever the master of macabre detail, took Perkins to the set that his team had created. Hitchcock had made sure that Ed Gein's house looked exactly like how the cops found it back in the day. The level of realism was disturbing. Hitchcock even created props like the preserved vulvas just to make everything look realistic. Perkins, confronted with the materialization of such horror, felt nauseous at the sight, and he went outside and puked. He challenged the director, telling Hitchcock that the censor board wouldn't ever allow him to make such a film, but Hitchcock simply told him to focus on getting into character and leave the rest up to him. The film's impact was immediate and visceral. The audience couldn't bear sitting through the entire duration of the film. Some of them came out feeling nauseated, and some criticized Hitchcock for his sadistic creation. Hitchcock, on the other hand, felt a strange sense of satisfaction. His sole motive was accomplished. The script then flashes back again, taking us to a moment of domestic terror in the Gein house, predating the main events. Augusta woke up angrily and went to the kitchen where she saw her husband, Mr. Gein, lying on the floor, drunk from the night before. Ed stood silently near the door watching, an eternal observer of his parents' dysfunction. Augusta shouted at her husband to get out of the house. When she saw that he had peed in his pants, she got even angrier and called him senseless. Mr. Gein apologized, a pathetic whisper, but Augusta insulted him, saying he shouldn't say sorry if he wasn't sincere. She told him he wasn't sorry for drinking, only for embarrassing himself on the kitchen floor. Ed watched quietly as his mother continued yelling. Augusta, in her absolute power, told him that he had no right to live in the house and should never come back. Mr. Gein got upset and shouted that it was his house too. Augusta replied that he never spent a single penny on it and didn't deserve to live there. Enraged and emasculated, Mr. Gein slapped Augusta. He instantly regretted it, but Augusta slapped him back and he ran out of the house in fear. Augusta immediately turned to her son, seizing the teachable moment. Augusta then told Ed never to touch a woman or cause a woman the burden of a child like his father did. Ed immediately agreed, seeing his mother's anger. Augusta, momentarily satisfied, smiled, saying it was the last time they had to clean after his father, and Ed smiled, happy to see her calm again. In a perverse moment of bonding, they danced together. The timeline snaps forward once more. Later, Ed was seen alone in the house, the chair empty, the air thick with memory. He is dressed in his mother's clothes, wearing a human mask and dancing happily by himself. The ultimate delusion. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. He asked who it was and found the police outside. The sheriff told Ed they wanted to ask about Mary Hogan and when he last saw her. Ed, covering for his dead mother, shouted for his mother to come outside, but she didn't answer. He told the officers to ignore her since she wouldn't remember. Ed said he saw Mary about a week ago. The sheriff asked if Ed had been at Mary's bar last night. Ed said he was home with his mother. The sheriff mentioned someone saw a truck like Ed's near the bar. Ed replied his truck wasn't working and told him to ask his mother. The cops seemed convinced and left. They also told Ed that Mary Hogan had been shot and her body was missing. Ed calmly said she used to live in Chicago, and maybe her past had something to do with it, a masterful, cold-blooded deflection. A few days later, Ed was at the diner, annoyed by a child making loud noises while drinking. Then Adeline entered and said she recognized Ed's truck outside. Ed looked surprised, saying he thought they wouldn't meet again. Adeline sat beside him and apologized for leaving suddenly the night before. She said she had felt uncomfortable and scared. Ed said he knew he had moved too fast and that his mother's sickness made her act strangely sometimes, clinging to the lie. Adeline said she was glad to talk to him again. Adeline, in her strange enthusiasm, showed Ed a newspaper with a story about Christine Jorgensen, a transgender woman who had gender surgery in Denmark. The story made Ed strangely happy. The idea of transformation, of becoming a woman, resonating with his mother fixation. He told Adeline he had an idea and would surprise her on Friday, then ran off. That night, Ed's excitement drove him to another act of violation. Ed went to the graveyard, dug up a grave, and brought home a ring. Later, he met Adeline again, and they drank wine together happily. Ed took her to the graveyard where he had set up a lamp. They sat together, and Ed expressed his feelings, then proposed to her. Adeline accepted. When she leaned in to kiss him, the final barrier was breached. Ed saw his mother's grave and remembered her warning to never touch a woman. He stopped Adeline, saying he couldn't do what his father did. Adeline said she understood and had a plan. Later, Adeline took Ed to Mrs. Heller, who was looking for a babysitter. Mrs. Heller asked Ed if he had experience with kids. Ed said no, but he got along with them. Adeline told her Ed would work well and for less money, so Mrs. Heller hired him. Mrs. Heller explained that her kids, Frank Jr. and Enid, loved their old babysitter, Miss Evelyn, but she was in the hospital with polio. Ed tried to entertain the kids with magic tricks, but they weren't impressed. He took them to his house to show more tricks, but things got strange when he showed them a human finger bone and then a severed head he had kept. The kids screamed in terror when they saw Ed wearing a human mask. Ed took the kids back home where Mr. and Mrs. Heller were furious because he hadn't told them. Mr. Heller kicked him out and told him never to come back. Later, when Miss Evelyn had recovered and was walking with supports, Ed started following her. He blamed her for making him lose his babysitting job and for ruining his chance to marry Adeline and have a family. That night, Evelyn went to the Heller house to visit the kids, but Ed kidnapped her. The next morning, Ed went to Adeline and told her he was ready to get married and be a good father. But Adeline's family refused to accept the relationship because of Ed's disturbed mother. Adeline ran away from home and started living with Ed. Ed told Adeline that his mother had fallen asleep on her chair and that he was going hunting. He took his gun and left. Adeline called out to Ed's mother to check on her, but she didn't answer. She went upstairs and saw Mrs. Gein sitting in the chair. When she got closer, she realized the figure was a woman wearing a human mask. Adeline screamed. The story then shifted to 1964, where people in a theater were shocked watching Anthony Perkins in Psycho. Anthony was struggling with the effects of playing Norman Bates, a character inspired by Ed Gein. He told his boyfriend he wanted to end their relationship because he liked a woman and wanted to marry, a desperate, sad break from the man he was. Anthony told his therapist he felt relieved after marrying and that his life had changed. When his agent told him that producers wanted him to play Norman again for a Psycho sequel, Anthony became upset. Meanwhile, Alfred Hitchcock refused to make another horror film like Psycho, but he later realized audiences only wanted such thrillers and weren't interested in his new ideas. One day, Hitchcock stopped by a theater showing The Bloody Pit of Horror. His wife disliked the film and left, but Hitchcock watched it with deep interest. The final scene returned to Ed Gein. He had kidnapped Evelyn and blamed her for his ruined life when she screamed after seeing him carrying a dead body he called Mother. He killed her brutally. Years later, that same horrifying scene inspired the famous movie Psycho. Ed Gein carefully coated Evelyn's lifeless body with lotion and wrapped it completely in gauze. As he worked in silence, Adeline entered the house calling out, "Mrs. Gein," assuming it was Eddie's mother sitting in the chair. When she got closer, she froze in horror. The figure in the chair was a dead body. Terrified, Adeline screamed and ran outside. Eddie heard her and rushed after her, leaving the body behind. Adeline reached her home, locked the door, and shouted from the window that she knew who Eddie really was. But Eddie knew a secret way into her house. He quietly entered and walked into her bedroom, where he saw a pair of green lingerie laid out on the bed. Adeline asked him to sit down, and he did. She told him that the lingerie was for him because he was the one stealing her undergarments. She accused him of being strange and hiding something dark. Then she said she would give him one last chance to tell her the truth. Adeline told him she had seen the dead body in his house and asked if it was his mother. Eddie replied that it wasn't. He confessed he had dug up a grave because his mother had told him to. He said he didn't know how to explain it, that the dead body had become his mother because her spirit now lived inside it. Adeline pretended to understand, trying to get him to talk more. She gently asked how he felt when he touched the body for the first time. Eddie said it was pretty fresh, only a week old. Adeline told him that everyone dies someday, and that it didn't disgust her. Then Eddie slowly unwrapped the gauze from Evelyn's corpse and undressed her. He took her lingerie and put it on himself. The story then shifted to a woman named Bernice who was getting medicine from Albert at the store. She was emotional and teary due to appetite suppressants. Later, while working, Bernice began crying again. Eddie entered her store to buy more lime, which he used to speed up body decomposition. Bernice, still crying, told him not to mind her. Eddie spoke kindly, and she felt comforted. She gave him a discount for being nice. When Bernice said she didn't want to eat because her appetite was gone, Eddie invited her to dinner, saying he couldn't leave a crying woman alone. Bernice agreed immediately. During dinner, she told Eddie her son, the sheriff, was too busy for her. Eddie asked why she wasn't eating. Bernice lit a cigarette and said she'd eat later. She flirted with Eddie, telling him about her past lover whose wife had killed herself. Eddie curiously asked if she knew where that woman was buried. Bernice noticed Eddie staring at her chest and asked him about it. Eddie asked about her lingerie, and she told him her late lover Bird had bought it for her. Eddie asked if he could wear it, and Bernice agreed, even handing him her bra. Later, Eddie took Bernice skating, but he started hallucinating, seeing Evelyn instead of Bernice. He gave Bernice a soda, and she went to get some wine for him. They spent a pleasant evening together. Eddie showed her that he was wearing Evelyn's bra under his shirt, and Bernice laughed. Bernice encouraged him, saying the lingerie looked good on him. She invited Eddie to move in with her so they could live together. Eddie agreed and went home. That night, Eddie kissed his mother's corpse, hallucinating that she was alive, and told her he was going to move in with a girl. In his mind, Augusta's voice responded coldly, accusing him of abandoning her like his brother did. She told him that Bernice would betray him and that all women would leave him one day. Eddie tried to calm her, saying he wasn't leaving. But Augusta continued shouting that Bernice was the town's immoral woman sleeping with married men, spreading sin and disease. She told Eddie that Bernice carried a venereal disease and that he was now infected. Eddie was confused and frightened. His mother's voice warned him that the devil had tricked him and that God would never forgive him for his sins. The next day, Eddie went to Bernice's hardware store. She greeted him warmly and offered wine and sandwiches. She even gave him her favorite lingerie as a gift. For a moment, Eddie felt at peace. But then his mother's words returned to his mind. He suddenly told Bernice he was ending their relationship because she was infected and spreading disease. Bernice, shocked, insisted she wasn't sick. Eddie refused to listen. He accused her of tempting him into sin and blamed her for his mother's suffering in hell. Bernice grew angry and told him to leave. Instead of arguing, Ed's resolve hardened. He pulled out a gun and shot her in the back of the head. The sound was muffled by the isolation of the rural setting. He then performed the grim logistics of his crime. He carried her body to the shed behind his house, an auxiliary structure now converted into a chamber of horrors. Later that same night, two unsuspecting hitchhikers looking for shelter wandered near Eddie's shed. They were cold, tired, and desperate for a place out of the wind. They noticed a faint, unsettling candle flickering inside the ramshackle structure, and seeing it as a sign of life, asked Eddie if they could stay for the night. Eddie, in his post-murder calm, allowed them entry. When they stepped in, they were horrified. The flickering candlelight illuminated the scene. Eddie was cutting up Bernice's body with a chainsaw. The noise, the blood, the sheer visceral reality of the act was too much. They ran for their lives, a chilling testament to the casual horror now existing on the Gein property. Meanwhile, a few miles away, Adeline, lying awake in her bed, restless with a mixture of fear and perverse curiosity, saw Eddie standing outside her window. He was a silhouette in the pale moonlight, a specter of the darkness she courted. Terrified yet drawn to him, compelled by a fascination she couldn't quell, she went out to meet him. Eddie, treating her as a confidant and collaborator in his madness, took her to the shed and, without preamble, showed her Bernice's mutilated body with its organs removed. Adeline, instead of collapsing into shock, maintained a terrifying composure. She secretly took a photo of the gruesome scene, a journalistic instinct overriding human decency, and then calmly asked him what he planned to do next. The story then shifted to 1959 in Texas. Two young boys, Toby and Jeff, were talking with their Uncle Bill during a casual afternoon gathering. Toby asked if he knew about the boogeyman, Ed Gein. The name had already begun to seep into the national consciousness as a grotesque piece of folklore. Bill told him that Gein killed people, dug up graves, and skinned bodies to wear their flesh. It was the stuff of nightmares, delivered as fact. When Toby asked how he cut them, Bill said, with a 1940 chainsaw, cementing the iconic weapon in the young boy's mind. Years later, in 1968, Toby, now a young man haunted by the tale, imagined a man wielding a chainsaw in public, a terrifying image that sparked his inspiration. By 1973, filmmaker Tobe Hooper decided to make a horror movie inspired by Ed Gein's crimes. His ambition was simple and chilling. He wanted it to be the most terrifying film ever made. He named it the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. In the movie, the relentless killer was characterized by a grotesque choice. He wore a mask made from human skin, just like Ed Gein had done in real life. The script flashes to a fictionalized epilogue. The final scene showed Eddie wearing Bernice's face and skin, pretending to be a woman. When an off-camera voice asked who he really was, the actor portraying Eddie said, "I'm a transvestite cannibal and a monster." Tobe Hooper later appears to offer commentary, explaining that he made the film to reveal the true horror behind Ed Gein and to show how a man became the very monster he created, a commentary on the corrosive power of madness. Returning to the timeline of the crimes, Adeline always felt like she didn't belong in her small, quiet town. Her self-image was grander. She saw herself as a city girl, ambitious, different, meant for more. One afternoon, while spending time with a local boy named Randy, a small-town anchor she desperately wanted to cast off, she told him that this town didn't deserve her and she was meant for city life. She was convinced her heart beat differently from the rest of the townsfolk, a belief that excused her darker curiosities. Later, back at home, Adeline argued with her mother. Her mother, representing the restrictive domesticity Adeline loathed, wanted her to learn housework, cooking, cleaning, taking care of a family so she could soon be a good wife. But Adeline refused, saying she had no interest in being a housewife. The tension escalated when she asked her mother where her man was, a deep, cruel jab at her mother's own failed relationships. The question stung deeply. Her mother slapped her and, giving her an ultimatum, told her that if she wanted to keep living in the house, she had to start learning household chores at Ella Laner Adams' home. Left with no choice, Adeline agreed. Meanwhile, Randy confronted her about rumors that she had been seen with Ed Gein. He was jealous and desperate and asked if she was two-timing him. Adeline, seizing the opportunity to dismiss him, snapped back saying city girls have different kinds of friendships and he, being a small-town boy, wouldn't understand. She delivered a final cutting insult, insulted him, and kicked him out. Later we see Adeline sitting across from Eddie, who was joyfully eating. The scene is a bizarre domestic tableau. He talked casually about how much fun he had mutilating Bernice's body, while the morbidly detached Adeline took pictures of the scene. He expressed how nice it was to be accepted by someone like her and said their marriage was now set. But Adeline had her own timeline and priorities. She pulled back, saying she wasn't ready and had to attend Ella Laner's sewing circle. Eddie wasn't happy, his face clouding with a familiar disappointment, but she insisted and left. At Ella Laner's home, many women were gathered laughing and eating. They extended a polite invitation, invited Adeline to eat, but she declined, saying she lost her appetite from seeing so much delicious food, a darkly ironic statement only she understood. While Ella Laner taught how to make candles, Adeline found a way to disrupt the placid gathering. She mocked the class, joking about making long, thick candles that wouldn't fit into hurricane lanterns. Her remarks offended the women. Then, with cruel precision, Adeline insulted Ella Laner and her son, calling them characterless. Eleanor was humiliated, the public shame a devastating blow to her reputation. The next scene is solemn and abrupt. It shows Eleanor in a coffin. She had died of a heart attack, and the funeral was being held at the local church. Adeline's defiance was never clearer. Adeline showed up wearing a red dress, shocking everyone. Her mother, mortified by the blatant disrespect, pulled her aside, furious that her daughter would dress like that for a funeral. But Adeline was calm, detached. Adeline calmly told her mother she was leaving town for good. Later that day, she took Eddie out for a big meal, a farewell feast, and told him about her plans to work with the famous photographer Ouija. She even offered him an anchor to her new life, suggesting he could work in the meatpacking district if she secured the job. As a parting gift, she gave him a book about Christine Jorgensen, a trans woman, and a DVD fuel for his dark identity struggles. Eddie was happy, but said he'd only let her go if she spent one more night with him. He drove her toward his house, but Adeline had a moment of clarity and self-preservation. She made him stop the car, saying he was trying to force something she didn't want. She was not ready to be another victim. She delivered a definitive rejection. She told him she wasn't ready for marriage and he should find someone else. When Eddie said he couldn't, crippled by his codependency, Adeline made a dark suggestion, a final, corrupting push into the abyss. Why not be with someone who can't say no? Like the dead. Eddie admitted he'd thought of it, but never dared. Adeline, now the temptress leading him further into sin, encouraged him. Dead people don't care, she said. They drove to the graveyard where she pointed to Ella Laner's fresh grave, right next to the grave of Eddie's controlling mother, Augusta. It's a sign, Adeline said. Back in town, her friend Suzette begged Adeline to stay for the ice pond social on Saturday, a final plea for normalcy, but Adeline refused. She hugged Suzette goodbye, saying she was leaving forever and no one would know. Eddie, now fully obsessed, retreated home. He watched the DVD Adeline gave him and hallucinated about Christine, his mind processing the idea of transformation and female identity. Meanwhile, Adeline arrived in New York. But the reality of city life was harsh, cold, broke, and alone. She struggled immediately, her romantic vision colliding with gritty reality. At Eddie's house, his new obsession had begun. Eleanor's body lay on a table. Eddie, wearing perfume and playing music, imagined she was alive. He spoke to her, laughed, and believed she enjoyed his company, his psychosis deepening into a strange, respectful intimacy with the deceased. Adeline finally achieved her goal and met Ouija. He was surprised by how many letters she had written him and agreed to meet. She tried to win him over, telling him she admired his photography, how it captured death raw and honest. But when she showed him the disturbing photos of Eddie's mutilations, evidence she thought would impress him, Ouija was horrified and threw her out. Adeline broke down in tears, her face frozen from the cold. Defeated and desperate, she lashed out. When the hotel manager refused to refund her money, Adeline snapped. She beat the woman and ran off with the cash, the city stripping away her morality. Back home, Eddie read about Ilse Koch, a German woman known as the Butcher who made furniture from human skin. He became obsessed with her too, finding another historical model for his perverse creations. Eventually, Adeline returned to town and saw the townspeople enjoying the ice pond social, a symbol of the life she had rejected but couldn't escape. She went home. Her mother was waiting. She asked about New York, mocking her for failing. Then, in a moment of agonizing truth, she admitted that she had tried to hurt herself when she was pregnant with Adeline. She suggested that maybe that's why Adeline turned out so strange. She softened slightly, telling her daughter to find a man who could handle her. That night, Adeline went to Eddie. The tension between them was palpable, a final, dark embrace. As they were about to sleep together, Eddie stopped. He confessed the depth of his latest fixation. He said he couldn't do it. He was now addicted to Eleanor's cold, lifeless body. Adeline, who had sent him down this path, understood and agreed to take a cold shower, accepting the strange boundaries of their relationship. The timeline shifts back to the period following Bernice's disappearance. Jose talked to his mother, Bernice, reminding her that holidays were near. He requested her to host a Thanksgiving dinner, just like she used to when his father was alive, and even after that with Bert, her lover. But Bernice, influenced by her brief, strange romance with Eddie, told Jose that she was no longer that kind of woman who did cooking, cleaning, and all domestic work. Jose, expressing a desperate loneliness, told his mother that he always gets bored when any events come around. He was an isolated figure. He had no friends, no girlfriend, and no family except his mother. Hearing that, Bernice felt sad and agreed to host Thanksgiving. She told him to make a grocery list. Together, they started to make a menu for the dinner. In the afternoon, Jose went to the hardware store where Bernice worked, but the store was closed. That was strange since Bernice never closed early. It was that same day when Eddie had taken Bernice's life. Jose, along with the sheriff, checked the store, but couldn't find Bernice. The sheriff said that the cash register was gone, which was suspicious. Suddenly, the sheriff saw something on the wall, a smear, a streak of the sinister. He tried to calm Jose, who refused to believe that the blood belonged to his mother. Jose said his mother was tough and couldn't be dead. The sheriff told him he would check outside. Jose told the sheriff that Thanksgiving was this week and he needed to get his mother back before the holidays. The sheriff assured him that they would soon find her. While searching the premises, Jose found wine glasses and a gift Bernice had planned to give Eddie. The tag on it read, "To Eddie." The trail led directly to the butcher. Jose and the sheriff then went to Ed Gein's house. The house was full of darkness and moths, a true house of the dead. They didn't find Eddie there, but Jose saw strange clothes hanging on a rope, not realizing at first that it was actually human skin. He also saw Ilsa Coke magazines scattered around, evidence of the sick inspiration. In one of the rooms, they saw blood on the floor, wine bottles on a table, and the entire room was a mess with a strange smell. Jose noticed human bones and many terrifying things lying around. The sheriff even found a human heart, and when Jose asked what it was, the sheriff hesitated to answer. They discovered human flesh and skins, and both men were shocked and horrified. The sheriff called for police backup immediately. The investigation began, but Jose was deeply upset since his mother was still missing. During the search, the cops found dried vulvas in Eddie's house, which looked recently taken. Suddenly, a horrifying memory surfaced. Jose remembered that Eddie had a barn behind the house. Shouting, he ran there while others were still investigating. Meanwhile, the investigation closed in. Eddie arrived home in his car and got caught by the police. At the same time, Jose entered the barn and froze in horror. Hanging from the ceiling was his mother's mutilated body, headless and lifeless. The police, maintaining their professionalism, confronted Eddie, asking him to tell the truth about how many people he had murdered. Eddie claimed that someone was framing him. He then requested the mundane over the monstrous. He said he was hungry and asked if he could eat before talking, and even asked to speak to his mother. The sheriff told him his mother was dead. While the cops tried to comfort the shocked Jose, who had just seen his mother's body, Jose's grief boiled over into a violent rage. Jose lost control, ran toward Eddie, and started beating him. The police pulled Jose away as he cried and shouted, asking Eddie what wrong he had ever done to deserve this. He said they always got along, yet Eddie had done this terrible thing. Later, Adeline was seen reading a book in a restaurant. Some town boys and girls mocked her, saying she looked dangerous as she stared at pictures of dead people. She overheard people talking about Ed Gein. Eddie was then shown locked up in prison, his face bruised from Jose's attack. The difficult work began. The forensic department worked hard to match the organs and hearts with their correct bodies. A doctor spoke to the exhausted Jose, who had been waiting for 8 hours outside. Jose said he just wanted to bury his mother properly. He only needed her body. The doctor explained that they were still trying to put the pieces together and couldn't hand the body over yet. When Jose asked which body parts were still missing, the doctor refused to tell him. Jose, at the limit of his endurance, shouted in anger, demanding his mother back. The focus shifts to the public side of the tragedy. The story then shifted to Adeline, who dressed in bright clothes and stepped outside to face the media. Cameras flashed as reporters shouted questions. Her mother stood nearby looking annoyed. Adeline took out a written speech from her bag and told reporters she had nothing to do with Eddie's crimes. She said they were just casual friends and all accusations were false. She shamelessly bragged about her intelligence and photography skills, but the reporters ignored that and kept pressing her about her connection with Eddie. Back in prison, the sheriff gave food to Eddie, still treating him politely. He got straight to the point. He asked Eddie how many people he had killed since it looked like there were around 200 victims based on the remains found. Eddie said people misunderstood him. What they saw in his house was just his hobby. When asked about Bernice's body found in his barn, Eddie said he didn't remember killing her, only that he wanted to hang her head on his wall. The sheriff asked if Eddie ever ate human flesh. Eddie denied being a cannibal, though people in town said he sometimes gave them strange meat. Eddie, in a moment of bizarre normalcy, asked for Dr. Bean's Pepsin gum, acting calm and polite. The sheriff also asked about Mary Hogan, Evelyn, and 2 missing hunters whose stories Eddie had clipped from newspapers. Eddie claimed he was only a crime enthusiast and liked collecting news. When tested on a lie detector, the results showed he was telling the truth, or at least he believed so, a testament to the depth of his delusional detachment. At Bernice's funeral, Adeline approached Jose, introducing herself as a journalist from New York City Daily News. She asked how he felt seeing his mother like that. Jose angrily called her crazy local girl, and the sheriff drove her away. The sheriff comforted Jose, saying he would soon find a nice girl, and invited him to his house for dinner that week. When Jose visited, the sheriff showed his family a new electric turkey cutter, proudly using it to slice meat. The sound and motion of the cutter suddenly reminded Jose of how his mother had been mutilated, and the horrifying image of Ed Gein came flooding back into his mind. The story jumps to 1958. A few months after the arrest of Ed Gein, the small town of Plainfield was a raw nerve. Frank Warden, likely meant to be Jose Warden, as he is Bernice's son and the previous character, the grieving son of Bernice, is still unable to accept the sudden and brutal end to his mother's life. He was also evidently clueless about how exactly to express the immense hatred, anger, and feeling of revolt against Ed that has only been growing in his mind for this long. But he desperately needed a release. He does eventually come up with a plan to seek some sort of revenge on the criminal, although it will not technically hurt him as much as Frank would have wanted to. Therefore, Frank decided on a controversial act. Frank decides to put up an estate auction at Ed's house, inviting townsfolk and also people from all over the country, as the case was getting media attention on a national scale, to visit the house where the Butcher of Plainfield carried out his gruesome acts and also buy items used by him. He meticulously puts price tags on each of the items in the house, ranging from usual crockery to the sewing hooks used by Ed to create his human leather overalls. This incident highlights 2 specific matters. The first being the extreme emotional distress that Frank finds himself in as he tries to get over his sorrows through whatever desperate means possible. He grimly knows that what he is doing is not really the most natural or expected course of action in such a situation. But Frank also does not care anymore, as his mother's murder has simply removed his moral compass. Secondly, the long queues outside the house during the auction highlight how humans have an inherent curiosity towards the macabre or the grisly, And how many jump on the chance to be a part of violent incidents from history by owning objects from the incident? It is absolutely baffling for Sheriff Arthur Schley to see so many people line up in front of the house to buy items used by Ed Gein in his regular life, and also in his overwhelmingly inhuman crimes, only to keep his memorabilia. He's also equally concerned about the mental health of his deputy Frank, as he knows that the latter will simply keep going down a spiral if he continues to associate with situations related to Ed Gein. To top it all off, he fears the cultural pollution. He knows that letting such objects be used by a fearsome criminal will only spread Ed's maniacal beliefs and intentions across the country, or at least the town, which would be terrible. Thus, Sheriff Schley first tries to talk Frank into canceling the auction, and then directly decides to take action to bring an end to such an event. Although the auction already begins and people bid for various items, none of the objects are handed over to them, because the auction is to continue for a couple more days. However, in a mysterious act of fate or intervention, Ed Gein's house is found to have mysteriously burned down on the night of the first day of auction, with all the items inside being destroyed as well. Frank directly asks Schley what had caused the fire, to which the sheriff states that the reason remains unknown and suggests that it might be a case of arson, a suggestion loaded with implication. But it is clear to Frank that it was Schley who must have ordered the house to be burned down at the dead of night to shut down the auction and to save Plainfield and Frank Warden from further trouble. The only remaining item left in a sellable condition at Ed's house is his pickup truck, which Adeline responsibly auctions off and sends the money to Ed at the Central State Hospital. Perhaps to everyone's surprise, Ed was a very obedient and normal patient at the hospital, disturbing nobody and even teaching carpet weaving and sewing to the other patients. Around this time, he receives the money that Adeline sends him, and he decides to buy 3 ham radios, one for himself and the other 2 to be sent to his idols in life. The first is Ilse Koch, better known as the Witch of Buchenwald, and the second is Christine Jorgensen, the singer and actor who became widely popular as the first American trans woman to have gone through sex reassignment surgery. Both these historical figures had indeed inspired the two sides of Ed, which is why he now expressed the desire to reach out to them through ham radios. When he first read about Christine Jorgensen, who had gone to Sweden following the end of World War II to undergo a sex reassignment surgery and finally live life as a woman, Ed felt overjoyed and inspired. It seems like Ed's goal in life was to change his sex, although his morals and complex belief system also made it impossible for him to achieve this goal. It was when his overly violent tendencies mixed in with this immense desire that he cut off vulvas from the bodies of women to try and stick them onto his own body permanently. During the long hospital sequence, Ed is seen behaving very well and normally with everyone at the place, especially with the nurses Salty. There soon seems to be a bond of friendship developing between the two, with Salty evidently feeling sympathetic towards Ed for all the troubles he is having to deal with because of his mental illnesses. There is nothing in Ed's behavior either that would suggest that he is a serial killer who had committed the most horrific of crimes, until there is a sudden change in him with the emergence of a new warden named Roz. Right after coming in, Roz removes Salty from the scene and places her own set of rules to keep all the patients in control, and Ed immediately hates the woman for her authoritative nature. It seems like Ed has trouble accepting only dominating figures, as his inherent but suppressed masculinity tries to take over whenever someone tries to control and dominate him. This was what had created the slew of mental problems in him in the first place, as Augusta's practice of exerting control over every aspect of her son's life had pushed Ed towards most of his crimes. Now, when the helpful and understanding Salty is replaced by the dominating Roz, Ed's conditions resurface very quickly, and he makes an elaborate plan to murder the new warden at one of the toilets at the hospital. He is seemingly helped by Salty as well, who secretly hands Ed the keys to his room so that he can sneak out and commit the murder late at night when there will be nobody around to catch him. Ed executes his plan brilliantly as he gets hold of a chainsaw and then hacks Roz to death with it, leaving a grotesque and bloody scene not just in the toilet, but all over the corridor of the hospital. He then returns to his room and falls asleep peacefully, only to realize on the next morning that this experience had been totally imaginary. Ed's worsening schizophrenia gets to such a level that the already thin line between fiction and reality inside his mind is almost invisible now. Therefore, he imagines the whole scenario of sneaking out of his room to kill Roz, and is then terribly scared upon seeing her alive and well at the hospital the next morning. Like this experience, Ed's conversations with his two ideals turn out to have been completely imaginary as well. During their talks over the ham radio, Ilse Koch had repeatedly asked him to not feel guilty or sorry for whatever he had done, much like her own self, who had defended herself in court till the very end. Christine Jorgensen, on the other hand, had tried to distance herself as much as possible from Ed and had only tried to prove how his criminal acts did not have any connection with his transvestite desires. But neither of these individuals had been sent the ham radios that Ed had wanted to gift them. Since it was the hospital's protocol to simply stow away any such items requested by patients in the basement of the building, Ed's own radio had never been connected to any electricity, meaning that it had not been working the whole time, and yet he had held long and detailed conversations with two of his idols through it. The doctor explains that this is further proof of Ed's worsening schizophrenia, and that he had been overheard by the nurses carrying out both sides of the conversations. This means that Elsa and Christine's words, claims, and advice for him are really coming from his own mind and from the multiple sides of his split psyche. Ed is told that his mind is like a shattered piece of glass, with each small piece being a different identity and persona. These strange experiences, as well as the harrowing truth of the diagnosis, are too much for Ed Gein to digest, and so he obediently starts to take pills prescribed by his doctor to put his mind to rest. The scene shifts geographically and chronologically. In 1970s Washington, a man fakes needing help and asks a young woman for assistance, only to strike her on the head and tie her up. When she regains consciousness, she finds herself on the ground beside another woman who has been restrained in the same way. The man is revealed to be the infamous serial killer Ted Bundy. He tells the women that he's going to sexually assault and murder them. After carrying out these horrific acts, Bundy leaves, but later returns to commit further sexual assaults on their bodies. The FBI was desperate for insight. The FBI visits a prison to talk with a serial killer, Jerry Brudos. They're hoping that he can offer insights that might help them track down Bundy. However, he doesn't prove to be much help. The FBI then turns its sights to Ed. They asked to speak with him in the past and Ed declined, but now that he's on medication and more stable, they believe he'll be more willing to talk, and that turns out to be true. The FBI visits Ed at the mental hospital and shows him photos from Bundy's crime scenes. They explain that Bundy decapitates his victims and keeps the heads as trophies. Ed comments that removing a head is difficult and demands a specific type of saw. It's a hacksaw. He then offers a genuine piece of tactical advice. He then tells them that if they really want to catch their guy, they should look into people who have recently bought those specific types of saws. The FBI thanks Ed for his time and then leaves. In his spare time, Ed cuts out stories of Bundy's crimes from newspapers. It's not entirely clear what he's doing with them, but it looks like he's trying to analyze Bundy's patterns and piece together a profile. The influence of one monster on another is highlighted. Crest Hill, Illinois, another serial killer. It's none other than Richard Speck, the mass murderer who killed several student nurses. Like Jerry, Richard idolizes Ed and what he did. He even sends him letters. In one particular letter that Ed receives, Richard mentions a man who idolizes him. He explains that the man was so influenced by his murders of student nurses that he plans to commit a similar crime, targeting a house full of college girls. Richard ends his letter by stating to Ed that he's going to send him the letter that the man sent him about his plans. Sometime later, a police officer from the Violent Crimes Unit visits Ed at the mental hospital after receiving a letter from him about a tip on the recent murders in Florida. Ed tells him that the killer's name is Ted. He believes he's the person who's been going around killing young women and girls. He then explains how he reached this conclusion. That letter Richard said he was going to send to Ed, the one from the man idolizing him. Well, Ed received it, and the Florida murders match up with the details in the letter. Shortly after, the cops arrest Bundy for his heinous crimes, and Ed watches happily from the hospital. Some time has passed since Bundy was arrested. Roz pulls Ed aside at the mental hospital to give him sad news. He's been diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, and it's beyond the point where treatment can help. Ed spends the rest of his days at the hospital, continuing with his usual routines. One day, Adeline visits him. Ed hasn't seen her in years. During their conversation, he tells her about how disappointed he was that she never wrote or called him. Adeline looks at Ed with a mix of sadness and guilt before sharing that she struggles with a mental illness just like him. Ed suggests that she could take medicine, but Adeline refuses to be medicated. She then shares a chilling confession. She then shares that her mental illness has caused her to write a list of people she needs to kill. Although Ed doesn't want her to do it, he knows he can't stop her. He tells her he loves her before leaving, a final, twisted sentiment. Sometime later, Ed takes his last breath while lying in his bed. The very end of The Monster is quiet, undignified. The final sequence is a homage to his legacy. A group of teens stealing Ed's gravestone, tying it with a rope and dragging it down the street. One of them spots a man observing from a distance. It's Norman Bates. Suddenly, two other iconic figures, Buffalo Bill and Leatherface, appear, causing the teen to flee and jump into a friend's truck as it drives off. Ed watches from a distance with a slight smile on his face before he gears up the chainsaw in his hands and starts swinging it, an imaginative post-mortem flourish. The final scene shows Ed and his mom sitting on a porch, a moment of imagined, perpetual domesticity. Augusta looks over at Ed and says, "Only a mother could love you." Staring straight ahead, Ed chuckles softly. This ends this disturbing true story about the serial killer Ed Gein. If you enjoyed this recap, subscribe and drop a like. On the right, you can find more interesting stories for you to binge. As always, grab your popcorn, enjoy yourself, and see you soon.